I think most of you know who I am, but just for those that don't, my wife and I have been mission co-workers in Congo for 37 years, and we were both born there. So we have 40-some years of connection to the country. For the last 20-some years, well, I've been mission and co-worker the whole time, but I've been seconded to a NGO, a non-government organization called I'm World Health, which we worked out kind of a hybrid system of mission commitment linked into donor funding or government funding. I was the director of that program for 15 years, but this last year I stepped down from that and moved into a position called Senior Advisor for Innovation, Localization, and Partnerships. When there was an email going around about what to do in education, I can't remember exactly what triggered it, but I responded that maybe in my new role with localization and partnerships, I could help out. And it seemed to strike a chord with people that they wanted to know more about that. And that's how I ended up at this pulpit here today. I think it's kind of strange that we're at this church organization, we're talking about a USAID term, one of their new initiatives, and how we can plug into that. But I think we need to be creative in the way that we go about doing missions these days. And I hope that through this presentation and conversation, we'll come to a way of supporting missions better. So this is like the second time that USAID has tried to bring local organizations to have more role in implementation of their programs for stability and for improvement in the quality of their programs. But not much was happening for a long time. But it's really starting to snowball with USAID and other donors to try to bring out, build up the capacity of local organizations. The USAID term is localization. Their target is to have 70% of their funding going through local organizations. They haven't, as far as I know, set an end date for it, but they're running very late. I've noticed that all the large programs that have come out in the last couple of years have had this formula to them where they're asking for, one, to partner with strong local organizations, have 50% of that funding going through them from day one. After 3 years, moving it up to 75% of the funding going through the local organization. And then after that, after 5 years, having it 100% go through local organizations. That's extremely aggressive timeline. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but I helped move a group towards a local organization. It took me 19 years. Maybe if we know what we're doing, we can get there faster. But what it's doing is all the things that were required of international NGOs now is being passed to the local organization. So technical strength, they're going to be looking for organizations with technical strength. They're going to be looking for geographical coverage, organizational capacity, and innovation for dealing with those issues. Those are the things that win new projects. So we started this conversation. It's kind of been on a fast track just for the last couple of months, where we've been talking to the heads of the church in Congo and people involved in this network here about how we can maybe transform what we're doing in Congo to meet some of these criteria. This came out of a USAID document that I just got my hands on about 2 days ago, and it shows the progression of this goal that they set back in 2002 to localize. And you can see for the first 14 years, they didn't make any progress at all, but there is catching steam. What you're looking at here is the number of local NGOs that are getting funding from the US government in Congo. So I think it's a huge opportunity for the church, for the local church, to get funding to deal with what their ministries are trying to do. The CPC and the CPK have had a long history of education in Congo. And my mother went out in 1947 to do education in Congo. And she wasn't even, the first doing that. Also, there's this huge geographical footprint that Jeff showed this morning. In fact, 75% of the schools in Congo are being run by church organizations, either Catholic or Protestant. But you need to put that into context of what we're dealing with. Congo now is the 4th poorest country in the world. Sometimes I look back and I say, what were we thinking when we did missions? We started 800 schools, we started a dozen hospitals, and we didn't think of, well, what happens to them over the decades? What happens to them in the future? And it falls on the local church to support all this. And we're in the middle of donor fatigue. Say, oh, we've been supporting this for 100 years, but they're in more need now than they ever have been in the past. And so how are we going to fill that gap? We've been extremely successful at evangelization. 95% of the country is Christian. And you look at Japan or Korea, they've outsurpassed us. But in much of the world, we did not have this impact. But in Congo, we did. So we were successful there. But they have all these schools to run. They have education programs. The government is not stepping up. You can see here on the slide, only about 60% of the salaries are covered for education, about 35% for health. So there's this huge gap and no place to fill it. Recently, I did what was called a value for money study for the British government for the project that they have in Kasai region. And I think it pretty much applies to education as well. But this is what's going on in the health sector. 42% is being covered by the local population. That's the copay that they pay for healthcare. The project that I've been involved with the UK government covers 40%. Other projects cover about 13%, and the government's only 5%. The church giving, I think it's strategic, has a big impact, but it's not even measurable in this formula. And I think education is probably the same. So this really relates to what I've been doing for the last 25 years at least. I've told this story before to this group, but you've either forgotten it or you're new people here. So in the early 90s, the Katangans were forcing out the Kasaians from Katanga back to Kasai. Now, when I say back to Kasai, the Kasaians had been in Katanga for generations, or for maybe a generation, but for decades. They were down in the mines with Belgian, programs, and now they were being forced out. Most of them were going to Mbuji-Mayi. And right in the middle of Mbuji-Mayi, they put the camp. There's 3,000 displaced people. And no NGO program, no international donors were addressing that need. But the church had stepped up. The church was doing special offerings to get them food. They were letting schools out early so the kids could go get grass to make huts for the families. Just about everybody I knew in Mbuji-Mayi had somebody living with them in their home that they had taken in to take care of this. And they were working with local trucking companies, trying to get these families out to the villages and talking to the villages about receiving these people. And I was thinking, this is incredible. There is no money from the outside coming in, and they are dealing with this problem in a very humane and effective manner. And so when a call for proposals came out by USAID, I helped the church and some Mennonites that were living there in Bushmai to write a proposal based on what they had already been doing. And it was rejected. It went to one of the large international NGOs. They moved the camp outside of Mbuji-Mayi. It mushroomed to 24,000 people. They had no program for getting them back into the population. Food was all being flown in from the outside and being dumped there. It was catastrophic. And it could have been done so much better if the church had been involved. When I saw that, I said, we need to be catalysts for giving Congo a voice in how it deals with its own problems. And so I spent the next 25 years trying to do that in the health sector, trying to get it so that donors would go directly to the Congolese to implement their programs and to get the funding. It wasn't called localization at the time, but that's exactly what they're trying to repeat. So I worked with this group that had been part of the USAID project in the 80s and now had, they were the ones that were committed enough to stay behind and not go out to other countries to get a job when everything fell apart. And so I moved my office there and worked with them and created this organization called SANRU. SANRU is probably the largest local health organization in Africa. It manages $160 million a year. So I know it can be done. I've done it, but it needs to happen at a much faster scale. We don't have 19 years to make that happen again. But I think we need to look at it in the context, are you on the right slide? Yes, you are, of our mission work overall. A book that was very influential to me back when I first started missions, I don't know where I came across it, but Tommy Brown's book on Presbyterian World Mission. He talks about how it grew, where it is, where it needs to go. And he did one chapter, it's a very short chapter, on the different models of mission. And this is the one he starts with. It's from 150 years ago. But you would be amazed at how many people still think this is what we're doing. There's been 3 different models since that time to the model that we're using today. And we're kind of, I would say, on the tail end of this model. It's the current mission is where the church on both sides is sharing personnel and sharing resources, but the church from the Congo side is doing it from their perspective, and the Americans are doing it from their perspective. It's helpful. It's way advanced from what I showed at the last slide, but it's still 2 different organizations trying to talk to each other and trying to do their work separately with help from each other. 30 years ago, Tommy Brown proposed this model of mission, one where the 2 churches work together to cross whatever boundaries need to be crossed to meet a need. And that's what we're facing here today for the education. They have 800 schools, no funding, and they want to keep making that happen. They still want to have that service for their community. How can we work together to make that happen in a mutual way where we are strengthening each other and depending on each other to make that happen? So I'm going to propose here something that's coming out of my organization, Chorus, but also just generally every single NGO is now trying to figure out what is the model? How do you make this localization happen in a constructive way? And I like this one because it's very holistic. We often just work on one little segment of this, but this core capacity system where you have commit, organize, relate, and deliver, all being a part of what we're developing when we talk about developing capacity. So the commitment, in one way, we're already there. You find a lot of people talking about it and a lot of people desiring it. But true commitment is, are we putting, is there really a vision, a purpose, and ownership to this, that we're trying to do? Is there an organizational structure and leadership being put in place, or are we prioritizing other leadership and other positions over making this happen? I remember there was some quote in something I was reading, preparing for this, and they said, if you start throwing resources before you have, the commitment in place, you're just wasting your funds, because they're going to use those to pay salaries, to do other things. It's not really going to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So you need to get this in place first. Second one is organizational. This is where we often think about capacity development in this sense, where we're saying, okay, they need to have an accounting system. They need to have policies. They need to have this, that, and the other. And that's all true. But you have to start with that commitment, and then you build this organization around that commitment. And I just keep digging deeper and deeper into this as we go along in this presentation. The third one is to relate. I think we relate to the Presbyterian Church in Congo, and the Presbyterian Church relates to the congregations here fairly well. But we're doing that in a bubble. There's a lot more people, a lot more stakeholders at this table that we're not talking to. There are multiple programs going on in Congo for education. And the CPC and the CPK aren't directly being benefited by any of these. They're on the sidelines, sometimes they're getting some training, sometimes they're getting some, government money for their salaries or something for the individual doing that. But it's not going to the church. The church isn't sitting at the table talking to donors, talking to partners, talking to people that are implementing these programs. I think probably the biggest role that I played in the last 25 years was this relational one, where I helped facilitate the bridge between the church or the community and the donors and the other NGOs to all talk to each other and come up with a vision together. When I left my last position, somebody from the government came up to me. They did a big ceremony and invited all the donors and all the government people. It was quite nice to see how many people I had touched over the time. But one government person came up to me, says, you're the only person that actually listened to the community when you developed or implemented a program. And that made all the difference. And so what I'd like to see come out of this localization is that we help facilitate that. And we have, both US people, or we were talking about some advocacy stuff around the table, where we're talking to our contacts, they're talking to their contacts. We're getting together to be at the table to talk about what needs to happen in education and what needs to happen in mission in general. And we're talking about education here today, but this could be applied to health, to development, to many things. We could move in this direction. The last one is on delivering. And the NGO world is a ruthless world. You get evaluated every quarter. If you're not performing, you get put on a performance improvement plan. If that doesn't work, they just pull the funds from you, and they'll do that right in the middle of a project. And of course, if they do that, your future is toast. So it's all depends on your reputation and how you deliver. So if you get into this, you need to have the best people. You need to have people that can really make this happen. Um, so this is what I consider the essential elements of local NGO. You have to have a dynamic director that has the technical competence and can network with donors and government. There have been studies that looked at what made a project successful, what made programs successful. And about 80% of it is who you choose as your leader. If you don't have a strong leader, you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve. But if you do, you can achieve things that you never thought were even on the table. These other things can come about later. You can get consultants, you can get part-time people. There's, you don't have to have your whole team in place. You do have to have your director, your leadership in place, but the rest can come later. And the things that they're going to be looking for is a qualified finance director that can develop a budgeted work plan and do accrual accounting. And I fight this battle all the time. Headquarters doesn't need a budgeted work plan. The donor isn't asking for a budgeted work plan. But to implement a program successful, you have to have a budgeted work plan. And you need to know the variance on that every line, every month. If you don't, you can't manage it. So until people look at the accounting from the basis of achieving, delivering, they won't be successful. And then all programs want to have more and more monitoring and evaluation. With all the electronics, all the new, everything out there, they want you to stay right on top of that. And if you're not, you will be left behind. So I've really prioritized the monitoring and evaluation component to all my programs. In fact, we actually got the government to switch over their whole information system for the healthcare sector because of what we brought to them and showed them what they could do with information. And as all of you know, information is power. If you are not controlling, following the information, you're not going to be at the table because you're not really that valuable to anyone unless you really know what's going on. Then the technical expertise, you can't fill all the posts, with people that are just interested in the program or people that are in the family or people that are pastors or whatever. It needs to be specialists in this area to be taken seriously. And then the independence of a competent governance. I think this is hard for us in the church to do, both in the US and in Congo. We want programs to run through the church. We feel like if we're not doing that, we're not respecting the history of who we are. I know in the Presbyterian Church, we have resisted ever starting an NGO, this Peace USA, that actually implements for us. PDA tried to do it at one point and it was shot down. They tried to do it in evangelism and it was shot down. So our own congregation hasn't been willing to make that step. And now as we talk to our partners in Congo, are they willing to make that step? Because if you're going to get donor money, you have to be completely separate. You can't be buying Bibles and, doing evangelism in the schools, with their money. You can do those things, but that has to be your money. The donor money needs to be kept separate. It needs to be trackable, it needs to be auditable, all of that. So it has to have its own independent structure to function. You won't be considered without that. And then the independent governance. Every organization needs a strong board. And without a strong board, you won't be making the right decisions. Even with a strong board, it'll be hard to be making good decisions. So the stronger you can get that board, the more representative it is of the community, of the people that are involved in that issue of education, whatever you're working with, that will make you successful. People often say, well, where are you going to find this, committed technical people that you would need to have an organization like this? We just don't have that in the church. Well, that's not true at all. Some of the strongest people that I work with came out of the church. And it's being able to recognize their potential and helping them build that potential. The person on the screen here is Bernard Ngoy. I met him back in like 2002. He was a young doctor at Bulape Hospital, and I could see he was committed, he was innovative, he was a good communicator, and Woody was running around at the same time and saw the same potential. So I don't know when we did that, but he got half the funding, I got half the funding, and we sent him to public health school, and he got his MPH. And then he worked for the government for a little bit, and then he came work for me. He's been my right-hand man for 14 years. And it's been a mentoring and a growth for both of us as we went through that process. Another example is Dr. Albert Kalonji. He was the doctor at Lubonda. Again, it was his first post out of medical school. I went out to visit Lubonda, and he was operating on this young man with, I think it's called catadine, which doesn't really fully put you to sleep. And so the body was twitching on the table, and he was there in flip-flops, sewing this guy up with a fishing line. And I was like, wow, what courage and, ingenuity to just use what you have to serve the people as best as you could. So he was actually the first person, when I got money from the US government to send people to public health school, he was the first one that I sent. Got his MPH, he was the top of his class, everybody was trying to hire him. So we hired him, and he's moved his way up. Now he's the technical director of SANRU, manages 18 projects with this budget of $160 million a year. And, those two examples come out of our church, out of our hospitals. I don't know what's in the education departments, but I'm sure that there are some young, dynamic leaders that we can identify and support and put there. When the church says we don't have the leaders to do this sort of things, you had them, but they left because you didn't offer them opportunities. And by doing this localization, we are giving them opportunities to stay within the church, to serve the church, but to have a career and have an impact on the countries, the country that they love. This is back to USAID, coming out of that same report I showed before. They did a study, and they had 560 organizations, local organizations that they were evaluating. And you can see here, 67% had less than 100,000. I don't know how much we give in education, but I'm sure it's pretty close to 100,000, maybe more, that we give every year just on our own. So we're already in the top tier as far as giving support to Congo to make some organization viable. But we need to go that second mile to get them up so that they can manage over 100,000, they can manage 500,000. Because a minimum project with USAID is going to be 2 to 3 million, and often going up to $10 million a year. We need to have people that can have that capacity. But if we leveraged our funds to build their capacity, then we can get there. So what do we need to do as an American church, or I would say together in this new model? What we're currently doing is we're funding things as we see the need. We're having people go over and visit and mentoring them, keeping people encouraged. We have a very mutual way of looking at it. We're not evaluators. We of course will talk about what's working and not working, but we're there to help. So we're mentoring and we're supplying resources. And all that needs to continue, but that's just step one. Something that is more structured and we could do more of. Site visits that are really organized to, help move capacity forward. Now, many of you remember Bob Ellis. He was the champion of this. He would try to organize a trip every year, every other year, flying around to all these mission stations, bringing people from, Presbyterian Women's Group or moderator of the General Assembly or different people to understand what's going on, and then to, discuss around the table together how we move forward. Things like on-the-job training, I'm sure that's going on to some extent. Internships, we don't have a formal system anymore that I know of. But I was thinking back, I was a Presbyterian volunteer intern, and it was formative for my, development of where I went in life. Hunter Farrell, Dan Stanton, we all were there, kind of a cohort of interns in Congo, and we all contributed heavily to, missions over the years because of that experience. In my program, I've been running an intern program for off and on for the last 11 years. And it's been so enriching to our program to have young people come in and look at things differently. And then from that experience, many of them have come back and worked with me on different projects. And I think we could do more of that. And if the Presbyterian Church as a Louisville doesn't have the program, we need to work it out somehow on our own. Trainings and workshops. A lot is out there. We're going to cover that a little bit. This low dose, high frequency training. What that means is that instead of doing like a week of pulling people out of their jobs, moving them to someplace to get trained, and dumping everything on them 1 week and hope they remember it, you work out a more of a every week or every month or every 2 weeks, someone is coming around doing one hour's worth of training on some specific subject and just moving people incrementally towards where they need to be in some subject. This has been very helpful in the health sector. A lot of organizations are moving towards this, and I think it's something we should use more. E-learning. There's an amazing amount of information out there now. In my project, we found an app produced out of Copenhagen, Denmark, that helps nurses do deliveries better. And we got that app into the hands of every single health center, and we've decreased maternal mortality by 38%. Because people have a source locally available to them. They know what every step is. They run into any situation, they can find the answer. And I know as Americans, we're a bit of an older crowd here, but how many times do you go look at a YouTube when you're trying to fix something? Or, it's just become part of what we do all the time. And we can research our churches and our, the people that are doing these programs, where to look. It's a little bit harder in French than English. Most stuff's out there in English, but it does exist. And often you'll find that the English version has a French version somewhere. So back to the courses. When I started doing the health stuff, I had public health degrees, but it doesn't really certify you to do some of the stuff I was doing. So this Momentum group specializes in helping NGOs and their staff get up to speed on whatever subjects they need to do. And so, I took 3 or 4 of these courses. I've sent my staff off to take these courses. Now there's more and more of these online. When I did it, I had to go to South Africa, and other people are sent to Kenya, so then it gets a little bit expensive because you have the transport and you have the housing and all that. But more and more of this is happening online, and you can get certified to do the accounting, to do the M&E plans, to do all of this. It's all available. And it's in French as well as English. And if you want to have the immersion experience, you know, you just send somebody to Cameroon or something to do the training as opposed to sending them to an English-speaking country. And if you're using this correctly, every time somebody goes off to get training, when they come back, they need to train everyone around them as to what they learned. And then you get a multiplier effect. The last group here is underutilized capacity strengthening. Consultants, helping them develop their manuals and tools and policies. You know, this is something that I do a lot. I have people on my staff that do this with organizations. Just about every NGO has people on their staff to do this. And we can identify those people in education and hire them as needed to move these local organizations to where they need to be. And then, as I was saying before, this networking, partner brokering, social network development, we really have to develop that. And it's hard for a Congolese to walk into a U.S. embassy and be taken seriously. There's cultural issues, there's language issues, there's so many organizations that we call them just briefcase organizations. There's nothing behind them but, you know, their paperwork that they have in their briefcase. We need to show the donors that we are more than a briefcase organization. We are a viable education program that's been going on for 100 years, one of the strongest in the country. But we won't be taken seriously unless we can help bridge that gap. Like I said, that was often one of my roles. When Bill Reinhold came through, unfortunately, he was too busy, but I tried to get him to meet with U.S. government and the U.K. government, because all of these donors have these programs going on. And sometimes having somebody come from the outside is a good excuse to go talk to them and learn what's going on. So, you know, I talked about having consultants and stuff on my staff. These titles I just pulled off my computer. These are things that I had hanging around in my localization, one of hundreds of different documents. Everybody is doing this, and you can choose which evaluation tool you want to use to help education, which, you know, documents you want to help people understand how to do fundraising, how to write proposals, all of that. It's all out there, and it's not that hard to access. In this networking, these are 4 different organizations and 4 different donors that all have programs in education going on in Congo right at this moment. And so we should be talking to them. The steps I see, and I don't think they're they are not necessarily sequential here. They can happen simultaneously or in a different order. But getting the stakeholder input for what Congo needs. I know that the education program basically started with that, with the conversation with Malumba and kind of listening to the needs and coming to a common sense, consensus on what was needed. But that needs to be done again. Finding that dynamic leader that can move this process forward is essential. Creating the legal entity. So it's a registration with the government. And that costs something. You have to hire lawyers. I've heard different things. Sometimes people say, oh, you can get that done for like $2,000. Last time I tried it, it cost $10,000. But it's not a huge amount of money. It's something that can be done. You have groups like PRODEC. They've already done this process for development. They're a registered local NGO. But in education, we would have to create that and then get it registered. Development of these policies on accounting and property management, human resources, all of that. Again, there's a lot online, just tailoring that to what our needs are. Finding the essential team, using available resources to address the needs. you know, it's very biblical. The people that handle well the small funds are the ones that get the big funds. And you already are priming the pump with the small funds. If we can show that those funds are being used effectively, then we get in line for the larger funds. The comprehensive information system. I know that, you know, there's been a lot of emails trying to get updated statistics on what's going on. This should be happening every month. You should always know what's going on. It shouldn't take a special study to find out what's going on in the schools in Congo. It needs to be continually happening. And I know there's 2 information systems that the government already uses, but I haven't heard anyone in the church mention those 2 information systems. And at my program with health, you know, we use the National Information System, but we supplement that with our own ODK systems that we put out for everything. You know, Inga follows all of her staff with the ODK. So every time they do a visit, she knows exactly what they've done, when they did it, what the results were. So you develop your own information system to stay on top of it. Linking up with existing programs like that Save the Children program that's going on right now in Kasai. The country director for Save the Children is a Presbyterian. And he had us over for dinner the other day when he found out that we were Presbyterian missionaries. I mean, he would be so open to working with the Presbyterian Church on whatever programs we have. We just need to make those links. And then you build your team around those opportunities. Some decisions that need to be made are, will the NGO, will it represent both the CPK and the CPC, or will they be 2 separate entities? There's advantages to both. You know, if you have in both, then you have more ownership by the church. But if you split it up, you have a less geographical footprint, and one group might make it and the other one might not make it. In fact, you know, none of this is guaranteed. Even if we put all this in place, we might not be that organization that USAID chooses as the one that they're going to fund. But one thing for sure is our work in Congo will be stronger, and we'll have more potential to do what we've been trying to do, and less frustration because of the capacity of the people we'll be dealing with. So what is the church's technical strengths, and how can they be developed? And how can we work side by side to develop that? What innovations are needed? If you're just saying, okay, I'm going to build a school and I'm going to put some books in, you know, it's hard to get funding, because yes, that's needed, but where's the innovation? Where's the leapfrogging of what we're doing to take them to another level? All you're doing is kind of putting a Band-Aid on a broken system. And how will the U.S. churches help in this localization process? All those steps that I talked about, you know, who's going to step up? Who's going to organize? Who among your congregation has some of these skills? Could be that consultant, could be that intern. Those are decisions that need to be made congregation by congregation. And I end on this. You need to always keep in your mind that your success is dependent on your reputation. And you're evaluated, like I said, on a quarterly basis. And all you have to do is miss 1 quarter and they're concerned. You miss 2 quarters, you're on a PIP. And so once you start moving down this line, you need to make sure that you can keep that quality up and keep that reputation up. And once you have the reputation, like Sanru, with their 18 projects, they turn down 30 projects a year saying, that's not our priority. Everyone is coming to them because their reputation is so strong. Everybody wants a strong local NGO that can handle this. And they just get bombarded with offers to be a part of this project or to lead this or to work directly with the donors. But you have to develop that reputation first, and then it can keep snowballing from there.